Parents tend to be cautious about what their children watch on television and the movies, and they often let ratings be their guide. But some researchers are asking if that is enough, and they believe one film empire can have a damaging influence on children if parents aren't diligent. They are thinking that the Disney princess culture perpetuates damaging stereotypes that young girls are buying into. And so here to talk more about this right now is Regent University professor Dr. Carissa Dwi-Wardani, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Sure, happy to be here.
So it's interesting because so many people think so positively about this whole princess image and what we see in the Disney movies. What is your thought on the stereotypes that they're perpetuating?
I think it's important to think of Disney as just one example of the values that our society holds. So one of those values is the thin ideal. There's an analysis on animation characters that highlights how female animation characters tend to have more of a restricted range in their body types than male characters. So if you look at the silhouettes and the physical features of female animation characters, they tend to be more restricted. And so the worry is that this perpetuates this notion that beauty belongs in a restricted category of body types and physical features that doesn't necessarily correspond to a reality, that human experiences beauty in a wide range of body types and physical features. And Disney, as well as other media, perpetuates this thin ideal and take a sort of a narrow slice of the continuum of human body types and physical features.
It is interesting how you see that repeatedly, and it can kind of just sink into your consciousness. Any other themes that you see being perpetuated that concern you?
So the second one is gender stereotype behavior. Researchers recently show that girls between the age of 3 to 6 that tend to engage more with Disney princesses, toys, films, identify with the Disney princess more. It predicts gender stereotype behavior 1 year later. And what that means is they tend to play more with tea sets and dress-ups and house and dolls rather than playing with balls or sports games or tool sets or action figures. Now, of course, that raises the question of whether this in and of itself is negative. Is it a bad thing necessarily to prefer these toys? And right now, we don't have enough research to answer that with 100% confidence yet. There was one study that showed that in an experimental study where girls who were exposed to Barbies, they tend to then perceive their career options in the future as more limited.
Wow.
And so there is this worry that gender stereotyped exposure to toys and play tend to then limit girls' perception of what they can do in the future. Again, we need more research in this, but
right. So it's interesting that there's this concern in light of that, but in light of there not being a lot of research on this issue. What is your advice for parents?
So my advice is twofold. One is that self-esteem and view of oneself has two components. One is that there's an affective component, right? An emotional experience of oneself, whether one is at peace with oneself. And then there's a cognitive component of oneself. And the emotional component of an experience of oneself has a lot to do with attachment. So how do parents foster attachment? Parents foster attachment by being available, being attuned and responsive to children's physical and emotional needs. And usually research shows that children who grow up and who have these types of experiences with their caregivers tend to have a more secure sense of who they are. So that's the emotional component.
So it's more important for parents to be engaging with their children and processing life with them than it is exactly how many hours of Disney movies they might watch.
So that is definitely one component. The cognitive component to it is, of course, managing the exposure, but also engaging them in a dialogue of critical thinking of what cultural messages they are perceiving. But the third thing is that it is important to the early research on Barbie dolls the researchers do recommend to expose girls to as many toys and play and interests as possible, so that there is diversity in what they feel like they can explore in their future.
So for parents who are believers, what do you encourage them to talk about with their children as far as what the Bible has to say about being a girl, about being a woman?
I think the Bible is very clear that for both men and women, that character is more important than appearance. And that character is most foundationally found its core in our identity as God's beloved. That in Christ, we are God's beloved child. And I think this is, again, on that emotional message, this message that needs to be communicated to children, that they are children of God. And so that's one aspect of it. The second is that I think the Bible is very, I think in contrast to a simplistic narrative that oftentimes is perpetuated in media, the Bible has references to women who are complex characters. And for example, the Proverb 31 woman, she is praised for her fear of the Lord, for her strength, for her dignity, for her wisdom. She is somebody who engages in business. She is planful. She's prepared for calamity. She's kind to her employees. She is fair to her employees. She's kind to the poor and generous. And so this is a very complex picture of a woman that I think is important to include in dialogues as parents engage their children in a critical thinking exercise of what the culture tends to perpetuate about women.
Great thoughts. All right, well, thank you so much for your time, and hopefully this will be helpful for a lot of parents.
I hope so too. Thank you.